What's going on, guys? Welcome back to ChessGainz. Today I have for you what I consider to be arguably my most solid tournament game victory of all time. And for this game, I'm throwing it all the way back to 2011 in the NJ Scholastic Championship. Now, this is a tournament for younger kids, obviously Scholastic tournament. And the section that I was playing in was the junior varsity section, so I believe the age groups were kids in grades 4 through 7. So I was in 7th grade at the time, so I was one of the oldest, but I was not the highest rated. And I actually went into the tournament thinking it was going to be tough, but the first 4 rounds I actually pretty much breezed through, not much of a competition. But this is now the 5th and final round, and I'm up against a very talented young kid. He was actually a year younger than me. He was in 6th grade, and he was already rated higher than I am now, to put things into perspective. And he was probably in the top 25 highest rated kids in the country for his age group. So really promising kid. I looked into his rating, what it is now, and he broke into the 2200s. He's a master now, but I don't think he's played in tournaments in years. But at the time, he was very, very strong player and definitely the favorite to win the tournament. And I remember sitting down right about to start the game. He was kind of relaxed, joking around with his buddies, laughing a little bit, thinking he's got us in the bag. He's playing white against a lower rated player. Should be an easy victory, right? Well, he still has to go through me, and I want to win just as bad as he does. So he opens with d4, and I go d5, and now we have c4, which is the queen's gambit. And the idea here is if I were to take here, he's going to play probably here, and eventually, oftentimes, white's going to win back the pawn. So I just went for c6, which is called the Slav defense, and this is an opening system that I was very comfortable with at the time. I still am, although I like to play other things. But the idea is very simple. You're just going to develop your pieces, get the knights out, and that's exactly what I did. So knight to d7, and now he jumps into the bishop. And this is exactly what I was waiting for. It's now a green light for me to take his pawn. And if the bishop takes, I kick it back with b5, bishop jumps back, and now a6. So the idea here is now I'm going to push this pawn forward. I'm going to put this bishop on this diagonal. I'm going to develop this bishop, and then I'm going to castle. So that's kind of the short-term 4 or 5 move plan. But he's not going to wait around, obviously. He's going to activate his own plan, which is to push up in the center. So he goes e4. And I counter with my own pawn advance, c5. So now things start to get really interesting in the middle of the board. If he were to take, this would be not such a good move, because after my knight takes, now I have 2 pieces hitting his bishop. And if he were to retreat, let's say bishop here, now after this queen trade, and he would probably take with the bishop or the knight, I actually grab a pawn. So he wouldn't want to go into that line. Instead, he moved his pawn forward again to attack my knight. So again, there's a lot going on here. The move I actually played was pawn takes pawn rather than moving my knight. Because if he were to take my knight, now I take his knight. And if he were to take my pawn, now bishop takes. And I have all of a sudden this really powerful bishop. It's like a cannon protecting this pawn. And if he were to take, I take. And it's now a fork between the king and the rook. So that would be really good for me and not so good for him. So he doesn't want to take this knight immediately. Instead, he actually gave up his knight temporarily, but after pawn takes, he takes my knight. And now I'm faced with a big choice. I can take with the queen, the pawn, or the knight. And I actually decided to take with the pawn, which looks a little bit strange. Typically, you want to keep these pawns intact so that when you castle, your king is safe. But in this game, I had a little bit different ideas. So I took with the pawn. And now, it looks like he can just pick up my pawn here. But actually, he doesn't. And this is actually a trap. If he were to take, it's now a check to the king. And the bishop falls. So he doesn't want to do that. And he doesn't even want to take this pawn because it could be a little bit dangerous. His king hasn't castled yet, hasn't gotten to safety. So he castles. And now I develop my queen with queen to b6, keeping an eye on both these pawns. So he goes with his queen. He's trying to attack this pawn. and I simply defend it with rook to b8. And again, he's continuing to develop, continuing to put pressure on me. He goes bishop f4. Now he's attacking my rook. So I just continued with a simple move, blocking the attack. And now we trade bishops, and he wins his pawn back. And now the material is equal again because I was up a pawn. Now he took it, so we're equal. And now I was starting to think, and I realized there's a little bit of a sneaky tactic here. So it looks like his queen and his bishop have complete control over this diagonal, but in just one move, you're going to see how this turns on him. So what I actually did was I took the bishop, temporary sacrifice. He took the rook with his queen, but now here comes bishop a6, and I'm attacking his queen, and I'm also hitting his rook. So queen has to obviously jump out of the way, and now I take. So now he took with the rook. He could have maybe gone for a check, but then we would have blocked, or I would have blocked with my queen. We would have probably traded, and he doesn't want to try to simplify things yet. He wants to go for a win. So now we're 20 moves in. A lot of pieces are off the board, and the material is equal, but the pawn structure is very different. He has these two pawns on the queen side, which are passed pawns because no other pawns are in their way to try to stop them from queening. But I also have a bunch of pawns in the center, and I'm going to try to use them to my advantage. So I start to push them. I go e5, trying to kind of shore up this defensive structure. And he now plays rook to c1, looking to go here and to attack my king. And finally, on move 21, I castle, which is pretty unusual. Usually your king will castle like in the first 10 moves, but in this game, it really wasn't necessary until now. And even though there's no pawn here, the king is pretty safe because he doesn't have enough pieces to really attack me with. So now he goes back with the knight, try to jump into this square, and I just stopped him with f5. And you're going to start to see these three pawns here are like footmen, and they're trying to break through the opponent's ranks, infiltrate, and get up to the king and try to assassinate him, basically. So he now launches his own plan. His idea is to try to push the pawns, obviously, and whoever can basically get their pawns up the board faster will win. Because pawns, you can underestimate them, but when they work together, it could be really deadly. So he goes b4 here, trying to push his pawns, and now I go e4. And what you see is I already have these three pawns that are already pretty far up the board, and his pawns are not that fast. So he needs to come up with something different. So he plays queen b5, attacking this pawn, and I simply just block with the knight. And what he should have done here is maybe tried to trade queens, do something active. Instead, he made a slow move, pawn to a3, protecting this pawn right here. And the problem is it's not really doing anything in terms of attacking. So it gives me time to launch my own attack, which is pawn to e3, and now I'm attacking his knight, and I'm also attacking this pawn here, close to his king. So he has to deal with the threat. Somehow, he decides to just take, and after I recapture, he goes back with the knight. And now here comes the next pawn, always moving forward. And now this is a really uncomfortable structure for him. He's starting to realize that he's going to come under fire. So he goes back with the queen. And now I'm starting to think, like, how can I make this position even better? And I realize that my rook standing over here has actually not come into the game yet. So I decided to move my king and free up some space, put the rook here, and that way he's going to be lined up with my opponent's king. So my opponent now moved his rook into the game to try to put some pressure on this knight. And the idea is, after he swings his queen over here, he's going to attack, but I decided I'm just going to kill his idea before it even really materializes. So pawn f6. What is he going to do now? He's running out of ideas. He played g3, trying to break up my pawn structure, but I'm not going to take him. Instead, I'm going to move the rook over, which is my plan the whole time anyway. So now, again, I'm eyeing his king. He can't take because that would put his king in check. So he jumps out of the way. And now, here comes the knight, attacking the rook, and also trying to see if it can get at the king. So he goes back, and now I have already a decisive advantage. I would go knight to f2 check. Attacking the king. He goes here, and basically after the next move, the game will be decided. So see if you can take a second to find the move that I played here. So congratulations if you found it. It's a pretty simple idea. The knight's already attacking the square. Only thing I need to do is bring the queen in. Now the queen is going to land on h1, and there's really nothing he can do to stop me. The move he played in the game was h4. If he were to give up the queen, I would just take, and just to show you what happens, after this I can even pick up his rook because now it's a fork. He's just losing all his pieces. It's game over. So instead, he basically accepted his fate and just played h4, and here comes queen h1, and boom, that's checkmate. And game over just like that. I win the 2011 Scholastic Championship with a perfect score of 5 out of 5. So in my opinion, this is my most solid game of all time, because to be a 12-year-old rated less than 1600 and play such a solid game with such few errors shows, I think, my potential at the time, and trying to carry that potential to this day. So hope you enjoyed the game. I'll hope to bring more of these games to you in the future, and take care.